Caylee Anthony. Everyone will know this case. All will have heard it, will have seen it on social media, will just remember it. It became one of the most infamous, emotionally charged and heavily televised criminal cases in modern American history. After Casey's 2-year-old daughter, Caylee Anthony, disappeared in Orlando, Florida during the summer of 2008 under circumstances that can only be described as disturbing and bizarre. The story quickly evolved from a local missing child investigation into worldwide media obsessions, with millions of people becoming convinced that they were witnessing a guilty mother lying in plain sight while a little girl's fate remained unknown. Because according to investigators, Caylee was last reliably seen alive around June the 16th, 2008. Yet, despite all this, supposedly losing track of her toddler daughter, Caylee Anthony did not call the police. She did not organise any searches. She didn't alert any authorities or report Caylee missing for an astonishing 31 days, during which time she continued living almost normally by spending time with friends. She was going out partying at bars and clubs. She was entering nightclub hot body contests, hanging around with a boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, shopping, borrowing money, texting people, and she even got a tattoo that read Bella Vita, which is Italian for beautiful life. Behaviour that later horrified the public once the timeline became widely known, because many people, me included, could not understand how a mother with a genuinely missing child could appear so detached and carefree. While behind the scenes, Casey was allegedly telling different lies to different people about where Caylee was. At times, claiming she was staying with a nanny named Zanny, short for Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, a person the police would later discover didn't even exist in the way Casey described, causing investigators to begin realising they were dealing with someone capable of constructing elaborate false realities even when they were under intense pressure. Something people close to Casey actually later said was not unusual, because she reportedly had a long history of compulsive lying about jobs, relationships, finances, and even personal circumstances, including falsely claiming at various points in the investigation that she worked at Universal Studios. A lie that became one of the most embarrassing and surreal moments of the investigation when detectives accompanied Casey to the studio, expecting her to identify co-workers or an office, only for Casey to walk them through the building and eventually stop and admit that she did not actually work there at all. A moment investigators later described as shocking, because she'd maintained that story so confidently for so long. Meanwhile, tension inside the Anthony's family had reportedly been building even before Caylee disappeared, though, due to ongoing arguments between Casey and her mother Cindy over responsibility, parenting, work, and even honesty, with Cindy helping significantly raise Caylee while Casey drifted through unstable jobs and relationships. And it was Cindy who finally actually sounded the alarm on July the 15th, 2008, that Caylee was missing. And this was after tracking down Casey and realising she had not physically seen Caylee for weeks, leading her to make the now infamous 911 calls, in which she desperately told dispatchers that her granddaughter had been missing for 31 days and that Casey's car smelled like, I quote, "There's been a dead body in the damn car." A sentence that actually immediately captured national attention because it sounded like the opening line of a murder case rather than a missing child investigation. After which, police rapidly intensified their scrutiny of Casey due to the contradictions in her story, the lack of verifiable evidence supporting her kidnapping claims, and just her strangely calm demeanour during questioning, while media coverage exploded across America, with television networks providing constant updates and commentators like Nancy Grace turning the case into national obsession, which fueled enormous public anger towards Casey as search teams, helicopters, law enforcement agencies, volunteers, divers, and even cadaver dogs combed Orlando's woods, lakes, swamps and abandoned areas, searching for Caylee. Eventually, uncovering several pieces of circumstantial evidence prosecutors would later use to build their murder case, including cadaver dog alerts allegedly indicating decomposition in the trunk of Casey's Pontiac Sunfire, forensic testimony about decomposition chemicals found in the vehicle, suspicious internet searches from the Anthony family computer involving chloroform, and topics that prosecutors linked to suffocation, and then sadly the horrifying discovery in December 2008 of little Caylee's skeletal remains in a wooded area less than a mile from the Anthony home, where duct tape was found near the skull, and the remains were so badly decomposed that medical examiners could not conclusively determine how Caylee died, forcing the official cause of death to be ruled homicide by undetermined means. Something that became devastatingly important later because, although prosecutors believed that duct tape suggested suffocation and argued Casey had deliberately murdered her daughter to free herself from parental responsibility and continue a child-free social life, they ultimately lacked direct evidence proving how Caylee died. There was no confession or murder weapon, there was no eyewitnesses, and no definitive forensic proof of intentional homicide. But despite those weaknesses, a grand jury got Caylee Anthony on charges including first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, multiple counts of lying to law enforcement, and aggravated child abuse, with prosecutors even seeking the death penalty, turning the upcoming trial into one of the most anticipated courtroom spectacles in decades as public opinion overwhelmingly declared Casey guilty way before opening statements even began. But when the 2011 trial finally started, defence attorney Jose Baez stunned both the courtroom and television audiences by presenting a completely different theory of the case, arguing not that Casey was innocent in a traditional sense, but that Casey knew that Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family swimming pool, and that Casey's father, George Anthony, a former police officer, helped conceal the death afterwards rather than report it, while also alleging years of family dysfunction, secrecy and sexual abuse that supposedly explain Caylee's compulsive lying and emotionally detached behaviour. Allegations that George Anthony strongly denied, while appearing visibly broken during portions of the trial. And from that moment onwards, the defence strategy focused less on proving exactly what happened to Caylee and more on systematically destroying confidence in the prosecution's forensic evidence by questioning the reliability of decomposition science, challenging the interpretation of the computer searches, disputing the significance of the duct tape, suggesting garbage in the trunk could explain the odour, and reminding jurors repeatedly that criminal convictions actually require proof beyond reasonable doubt, rather than emotional certainty or moral outrage, especially in a death penalty case where even small uncertainties can become decisive. And as the weeks passed, some legal analysts began realising the prosecution may have overreached by charging first-degree murder when actually they could not even definitively establish the mechanism of death. Because while Casey's behaviour after Caylee disappeared appeared deeply suspicious and emotionally disturbing to millions of people watching the trial, the defence successfully argued that bizarre conduct and habitual lying did not automatically prove intentional murder, which I can sort of get, but you would still. There's no excuse for not reporting it. This eventually led to one of the most controversial verdicts in American legal history, and on the 5th of July 2011, when roughly 11 hours of deliberation, the jury actually found Caylee Anthony not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse. She got convicted only of lying to police. And this was a decision that triggered immediate outrage across the United States, with crowds outside the courthouse screaming in disbelief. Commentators actually compared this to the case of O.J. Simpson when he got his acquittal. Social media exploded with fury, and many Americans insisting justice had completely failed little Caylee Anthony, while later interviews with jurors suggested several believed Caylee likely knew more than she admitted, or bore some responsibility for Caylee's death, but did not feel prosecutors had legally proven intentional murder beyond reasonable doubt. A distinction many members of the public struggled to accept because the emotional weight of Caylee's lies, behaviour and apparent lack of urgency had already convinced much of the country that she was guilty long before deliberations began. And in the years since the trial, Caylee Anthony largely disappeared from public life, and this is probably due to the intense hatred and public scrutiny. Occasionally she resurfaced in interviews where she continued to deny any responsibility and claiming she did not know exactly how Caylee died, before reigniting controversy again in 2022 in the documentary series Caylee Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, in which she expanded her allegations against George Anthony and attempted to present herself as a manipulated and abused woman trapped inside a dysfunctional family system, and claims that deep deeply divided audience, because these claims deeply divided audiences because some believed the documentary raised unanswered questions, while others felt that it represented another example of Casey reshaping narratives to suit herself. And even today, the death of little Caylee Anthony remains one of the most debated, unresolved cases in true crime history. Because although millions remain emotionally convinced Casey Anthony intentionally killed his daughter, the American legal system ultimately concluded prosecutors failed to prove exactly how Caylee died, or establish murder beyond reasonable doubt, leaving behind a haunting case where a little girl lost her life. Her mother became one of the most hated women in America. A family publicly imploded under international scrutiny, and the full truth of what happened during those missing 31 days may never actually be known. Now, I'm not from the US. I am from the UK. And I was pregnant with my first child when this happened. And I can remember it all unfolding. And even now, 18 years later, I can still say this is one of them cases that I think the jury got it wrong. I think they got it seriously wrong. Even if you had nothing to do with it, or you knew someone had done something, you know, it wasn't you, you would not be partying. You would not be doing anything she did, and you would 100% would have reported it. It's inexcusable, the things that was done, and even just the lies, inexcusable. Do you think this case is ever going to, the truth is ever going to come to light? Do you think that she was convicted wrongly? She's guilty, she's not guilty? What's your thoughts on this? Everybody's got an opinion on this case. Everybody. Let me know in the comments.